So we'll start off with comments from the public. I don't see anybody on the attendee list. We don't have anybody in the room. So we'll continue to move on. Approval of the minutes from March 28th. They were distributed late last week by Jennifer. Hope everybody's had a chance to read them. I'll take a motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Oh, second.
Second was Susan. Any discussion, changes, modifications we want to make? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so as I had noted in the email that I sent you folks as we were setting up the schedule for the next few meetings, one of the things that came about in a conversation that First Selectman and I had was the recognition that although we had not around this table talked much about it, that this whole resiliency, preparation for resiliency, all of that was a named possibility by Treasury, by Congress for the use of ARPA funds. And so as we thought about the 1.2 million or so that we have left and how we would like to divvy that up, one of the, just recognize that we had not really talked about where we are in Old Saybrook relative to resiliency and resiliency planning and what types of projects there might be that we would want to commit some ARPA funds toward. So Chris Costa, as our town planner, as our CEO, many hats that she wears, is also the person who knows everything there is to know so far about resiliency. And Chris, I'll turn it over to you to just kind of bring us up to date on what the town has been doing, what it is going to be doing, and then we can talk about what role the ARPA committee and ARPA funds might want to play.
Thank you. So just to give you a little history, the town has been involved in resiliency planning and has participated in the National Flood Insurance Program since the 70s. We've done that as kind of a collaborative approach, myself, the building official, and our town engineer. And as we've learned and as we've seen more roads flood and more houses flood and Sandy and Irene, we obviously know that sea level rise and climate change is real. And over the years, we have gone through and adopted higher standards to our town flood ordinance. Those higher standards require 2 feet higher elevation of the house above the FEMA standards, higher regulatory standards for critical facilities, by critical facilities, schools, municipal buildings, affordable housing or other housing development, senior housing. And we've continued to change our standards and make them a little tougher, which we've gotten some negative feedback in some ways, but after people saw the flood maps change multiple times and found out when the maps changed, they became non-compliant and their insurance would go up, people got a little bit more appreciation for the higher standard because they said, well, gee, I was really angry that you made me put my house a foot higher than I was supposed to by FEMA. But now this 50% structure value rule doesn't apply. So I think the town is learning from it, and by having the higher standards, our housing stock is going to be more resilient in future storms and floods. So that's just one of the, the things that we've done as far as the flood program and flood protection of structures. But somewhere around 2013 or 14, there was a group of individuals who went to the Board of Selectmen or the First Selectman at the time and said, we have a problem here. And things are changing, climate's changing, sea level rise. So there was a committee formed. And in 2015, that ad hoc committee of the Board of Selectmen did the report of findings from a study of the effects of sea level rise and climate change. And that was completed. And there were certain things that they wanted to monitor. In 2015, the group pushed for the installation, was able to get funds to have a tide gauge at Saybrook Point. So now we can monitor immediately what's happening with the tides. versus working or New London in different areas, and to see those changes. So it allows us to collect that data. And then shortly after that, we received a $200,000 grant from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. It was a CDBG block grant. And with those funds, we hired a consultant, and we were one of the first, I would say, in the region to have an actual sea level rise study done. And at that point, it was to characterize floods, evaluate our vulnerability and risk, inform, and educate the town professionals and developers as to what those risks were, evaluate feasibility of different coastal flooding mitigation strategies and recommendations and actions for implementation. And it was more of a broad-based study, and at that time it was just Old Saybrook. Fenwick was not included. So since that time, we kind of continued with our permitting efforts, and I'd say about a year or so ago, I was contacted by a group in Westbrook, and they said, "Can you come to one of our meetings?" "You want me to come to a Westbrook meeting?" I said, "No, you know about it. Don't have a planner here on staff right now. Can you come to the meeting?" So I went to the meeting, and they had a lot of similar concerns that our residents have. And there was Chapman Beach. There was actually someone from Summerwood, but mostly Westbrook residents. And they said, our roads are flooding. Yeah, we're getting the same complaints. And my beach sand, all of a sudden, it goes away every year. In my neighborhood association, every year we're trucking in sand. And then someone else goes, "Wait a minute, I'm taking away sand." And then the next person goes on to say, "My seawall's collapsing," or "My seawall is undermined." So I took this all into consideration, and I said, well, this is kind of interesting. And Westbrook hired their town planner. So Peter Gillespie's the new town planner in Westbrook. It's been over a year now. So I called him up and I introduced myself, and we went out to lunch. And I said, it was kind of interesting that Westbrook is reaching out, and Old Saybrook's had a number of issues. And we talked about some of the things, for example, I think you're aware there's been some issues with beaches losing beach. And now we kind of have to characterize it a little into the community. So, and I'm not going to pick on any in particular, but Beach Association 1 says, "Well, gee, I'm losing sand." And Beach Association 2 comes in and they say, "Well, I'm losing sand. And then I trucked in all this sand, and DEP wrote me a letter because I brought the wrong kind of sand in." And Beach Community number 3 says, "Well, gee, my seawall is compromised. How do I go about the repair? How much is this going to cost?" Then you have different neighborhoods who've done studies, especially those with docks and marinas, saying, "Well, why are we always dredging? Things are just silting in. Why is the marsh starting over here? Why am I gaining more beach? Why all of a sudden in this area I used to fish?" We said, "Well, more." So there's things that have been changing. And, in addition, and I will say one of the things that's been a discussion since I've started here 23 years ago is there's always been some talk about the Chalker Beach tide gate. And, that tide gate has influences to Old Spring, to Chalker Beach, to Long Island Sound, and it's one of very few actual structures that we have for flood control or mitigation. So Peter and I talked, and then we started talking about all the things going on in Westbrook. So we said, well, why don't we get together and apply for a grant? Because what we've also found, or I found, is that each association 1 puts up some more timbers on their revetment, which is a structure that goes out into the water because they're trying to keep their sand. And then maybe each Association 2 next door is losing their sand because now one neighborhood's holding the sand. So then Beach Association 2 brings in sand, and Beach Association 3 goes through, and all of a sudden they say, well, what's going on? This area in front of our beach is all silting in, or where did our beach go? And I mean, this is really very general, what I said, that there's something to this. And in 2017, I think was when we started doing our workshops for the 2018 plan, we had an all-day meeting at Chalker Beach. And then we had charrettes, and we spent a lot of time going through this. And one thing, we all kind of went on our way. And each of the associations over the years has said, well, I went through and we spent X amount of dollars. I mean, this isn't a $500 project. This is, even the neighborhood I live in, I'm reading their minutes because I don't go to their meetings, I have enough on my plate, and I'm reading, and they hired an engineering firm for $15,000. And then I find out to look at sand, and then I look at another neighborhood, and they spent, we just spent $20,000 on, and it's not like call your local landscaper and move some sand around. It's a lot of money. And I said, nobody's really talking to each other. So that, going into that Chalker Beach meeting, there was some discussion about why don't we have, like Westbrook and some of the other towns, a beach association coalition. And the beach associations, they actually did get together, and they have a nonprofit that they've become. But through those discussions, there was a lot of talk of, well, my problem right here in association number 1 needs to be addressed right now. And the next person at the table said, well, I'm having this immediate problem here. So Peter and we also joined up with Benwick. Marilyn Osels is their staff member. And at the time, Clinton did not have planner. And we said, all of our communities are having the same problem. And there's a lot of money going out, whether it's the town's money or neighborhood association money, but we're not talking. And it's always the immediate need, which I get it. This is what's happening to me right now. Wouldn't it make sense if we got together and talked about getting a grant to look at just everything that's going on, other than staying in our silos to deal with our immediate issue? So in 2022, we applied for the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation Long Island Sound Funds Future Funds Grant, sorry, that's a mouthful. And we competed for millions of dollars nationally, and we were awarded a grant. And I think part of it was they liked that we were working together. We got out of the silo, we got out of our neighborhoods, we went beyond the boundaries. So we ended up, we got a grant, and because we're a little bit ahead, because we do have a sea level rise report from 2017 that needs some updating. Benwick has nothing. Clinton and Westbrook are just starting their reports and their committees. We ended up that we obtained a grant for $230,250 with a match of $80,250. Of that, I know that Westbrook, because when we started this, Clinton really didn't have a staff member. Westbrook is looking at approximately $30,000. And I'm saying approximate because there's also the opportunity for us to reduce our matches by the contribution of staff time. So the 2022 grant was actually, we could only have one applicant. So Westbrook took the lead on that one. So I believe we're looking for Old Saybrook for approximately $25,000 for that match towards the larger plan. So we went back to our, I'll call it, there are sea level rise committee for the town, and at the time they were association and beach coalitions, and they were forming, and we said, we're going for this grant. I said, well, how long is this going to take? And they said, well, we understand it's going to take time, but we really need to look at this as a big picture item and try to focus on what's happening, and then maybe we can start identifying projects. Maybe if there's a problem here and we can fix problem A, it'll help multiple communities in multiple areas at the same time versus just kind of going the way that we've been, you know, patching things together. And they were happy that we were going for it, but it didn't, I know some of the neighborhoods really, it didn't express, you know, well, but that's not going to solve my problem today. So the initial plan was we were going to wait a little bit, and we ended up that the 2023 grant came up. And there was some discussion, should we do it? Should we go with the other towns? And there's been some issues, and it started with Chapman Beach, and that was one of the ones that contacted me, as well as others in Westbrook, which is right on the border. They're seeing some issues with beach sand. They're seeing some marsh starvation. You've got Summerwood right there, and you've got the Chalker Beach Tide Gate. So Peter, the town planner in Westbrook, and I, we discussed it a little and said, well, why don't we go for the grant? Obviously, there's only so far we can go. Let's try to go for the second grant. And we were very lucky. And this time Old Saybrook took the lead, and we were able to get, or I was able to get a grant from Sea Grant for a grant writer who I ran into, who actually participated in the 2017 study when he worked for Yukon Clear. And we were also fortunate that we had another company that was willing to, we wrote them into the grant for some more technical information. And then we also went through, and another gentleman who helped us get the grant, the 200,000, who's in between firms. I said, would you mind looking at this? And he's in between consulting jobs. So we had a lot of people look at it. I mean, it's a pretty big document. And our town engineer initially we had some discussions, and it's way kind of beyond our local expertise. It includes bathymetry, hydraulic and hydrological investigations, coastal modeling, tide modeling, review of what's happened. And like I said, I'm really kind of making this simple because it can be really complicated. I never thought that, you know, we would end up with a document as large as we did. So we ended up that Westbrook and Old Saybrook is the lead. We started looking at what was going on. So I said, well, where does streets flood in Old Saybrook? So I have the map, and I start with my circle. And then I'm like, well, you know, I can really make this giant circle of the whole coastline. And we started in Chapman, and so, okay, we kind of have to keep it down. So we started through Chapman and that area of Westbrook. We went through, and then we stuck kind of in the Mud Creek Indian Town border through Shetucket Trail. And these are areas that we've had repeated. I mean, Chalker Beach, Summerwood, you've got it, Bel Air Manor, Indian Town, where we've had a lot of issues with road flooding, sand deposition, erosions, you name it, we have all of those things going on. And I said, well, when I first started with the circle, our grant writer's like, Chris, you know, and I said, well, you asked me to circle. And I said, I can keep going. I said, I gotta put a boundary onto it. And it ended up that as we started going through just for these studies, the total grant amount that we're requesting is $352,546.90. These are for these studies, evaluations of the marsh. And the thing is that by doing this, you know, in a good example is Chalker Beach. Chalker Beach has had that tide gate. I'm going to pick on the tide gate because it's a structure. And for years we've had complaints. It's working. It's not working. We should just take it out. And I'd say 6 to 8 months ago, our town engineer and I met with Deep. And I mean, I cannot tell you how many times the public works director, myself, the town engineer, Deep, the first selectman, the previous first selectman, you name the amount, the person, they've been out there, and we've spent so much staff time from the town trying to figure out, you know, what's going on. So one of the neighborhood folks said, well, gee, you know, what do you need to do to figure out what's going on with it? So we sat down with Deep, and they said, well, you know, we need studies. What kind of studies? They're like, well, we're not really even sure what kind of studies. But here's the thing, is that they really need to evaluate, you just can't like, pull a tide gate out and all of a sudden change tidal flows, and destroy marshes or maybe create new marshes. And the other thing that was interesting was when, after Irene and Sandy, there were a lot of coastal changes. So, for example, in Summerwood, there was this nice area, which was almost kind of like a little island, you could kind of walk out there. Well, Sandy deposited all kinds of sand. And Sandy deposited all kinds of sand over in Trucker Beach. And it didn't go away. So we have reports that were on file, and like I said, I'm picking on the Trucker Beach one just because it's an example of why we don't have shovel-ready plans. And we said, well, we had a report from a 2000 Home Depot development that talked all about potential things that we could do, but it was all different. So they're like, well, yeah, this would be helpful, but the whole shoreline has changed. So in order to go through and deep kind of finally gave us some guidance as to things we would need, but now we're also factoring in sea level rise, you also have climate change. There's so many factors and it gets so technical, and the amount of environmental concerns, that come up with it. It's not as though you can just go out and say, oh, there's a seawall there. Well, here you go, here's a shuttle, here's your permit, you go on your way, because by changing, a seawall or adding a seawall, what you're doing is diverting shoreline waters to another area. Mm-hmm. And you're wiping out potentially a beach or some other resource in a different area. Or fixing them or making them higher, just like you deposit sand on a beach, with our beaches have been doing historically for 50+ years. But now we're in a different situation because our beaches are smaller. And I mean, there's examples, from a permitting perspective. I'm just looking at my watch. I know there's a 6 o'clock meeting.
Sure.
But so for example, the town beach, you look at a map of the town beach that's in our files upstairs. The beach is smaller. Mm-hmm. What's happened to the beach? So we're hoping that we can get the second grant, but we're really stuck because we could rush out and try to fix problem number 1 or problem number 2 or problem number 3. And I mean, it's been happening over time, but are we just kind of throwing money at a temporary fix when we really need to learn what's going on? And I mean, if it was up to me with the grant and the grant writers, like just the study area, I mean, I just would have went from the Westbrook border to Fenwick and just said, okay, this is our area. And there's only so much that we can apply. So those are some of the things that we're working on.
Specifically, what will the 2022 grant, what are the outcomes we're looking for from that?
So the outcome is to get a better idea of what's going on from Clinton to Fenwick.
And how it's all interrelated.
Yes, and to get the information. So for whatever reason at the time, Fenwick was excluded from that study. Westbrook never conducted a study in Clinton. And by going through and looking at this, we're trying to figure out ways that we can work together and try to figure out on a broader approach what's happening. And to get out of the silo. And the purpose would be the more information we can get and to see the problems, to see the areas where, marshes are degrading, there's marshes that are dying, to try to go through and figure out areas of concern and those projects. The 2023 grant that we just applied for, Old Saybrook with Westbrook as our partner, is to get more focused. And maybe if the 2022 grant, which we've been told is very aggressive because we just met, I would say about 2 weeks ago, we've already gotten our proposals for consultants. We've reviewed our proposals. We picked a consultant, but that's not officially, hasn't been released yet. And our deadline is that this study needs to be done by July of 2024, which is very aggressive. And even the consultants that we met with said that. But the one that we think is best for the job is very confident that they can do it.
I don't understand. Nature's taking its course. Are we spending a lot of money to prevent it?
But we're trying to figure out what's going on. I mean, there's some folks and groups, and even the state of Connecticut will say, well, the best thing is to retreat, and that's just a bad word, you know, and so that towns should just stop allowing people to rebuild their homes and their beaches and their shoreline. And that we should just move back. So if your house gets wiped out or your structure, whether it's a commercial building, you're not allowed to rebuild it anymore, and we just all move north. So that's not a real favorable suggestion.
But, you know, I've seen it on the speeches here where somebody puts in a new wall and the guy next door suffers. You know, I see it in Trotter Beach especially. And it's like, you know, the guy next door, the wall created the problem for the person who now is suffering. And I don't know where it ends.
Well, I mean, there's certain things too you have to take into consideration. There's a lot of people who've gone through and haven't gone through the right channels to put up walls. We find it a lot. People buy houses with docks and seawalls, and people who are coming in to do their homework are going through and oh, is there a permit for the dock? And I'm like, well, we don't permit the dock, but what dock? and this is, you know, another thing, it's how things are being done. So I think the more information that we have to kind of see what's happening, we can provide it to DEEP, we can provide it to property owners, you know, and we can make some suggestions to say, homeowner Susie, you know, you really shouldn't put that wall up. That's against what we're trying to do. You're going to impact the different people, your neighbors, and further down. And that's kind of the purpose of the study, is that everyone's going in for their immediate fix. This is going to fix my problem right now. And then.
My people.
Well, I just want to make sure I understand that you're just, when you're talking about the funds for the 22, they've been awarded, and the 23 you've applied for. So from the town of Old Saybrook and potentially this committee, this ARPA committee, it's just $25,000 that you're looking for as a contribution?
Well, 25,000 is the 2022.
Okay.
The
The 20
Saybrook Westbrook Award. Westbrook right now is not sure how much they're gonna contribute. We don't have this, so, you know, so we don't have the grant in place. We asked for $352,546.90. The grant match is $88,137.75.
This is for the 2022
2023. The 25 for 2022.
and 80-ish for 23. Almost 90.
Almost
Yes.
90,
Okay.
and the hope is that if I work really hard, my in-kind services, if your town planner will take $16,303.75. But it's an estimate, and that's kind of what we're going through with Westbrook. We're writing down our time, what they're gonna allow us for an hourly rate. Westbrook right now has, for the 2022 grant, is gonna be awarded a little bit more money as far as I think towards their match.
Got it.
But this round, on the larger grant, we would take the lead, and I'm not sure exactly, you know, how those numbers are gonna work out, but we don't have it.
I got a copy of that 2017 study on rising water.
So if you go on the town website, there's a link and it says town plans and reports. The 2015 report is there, the 2017 report is there. The other thing to kind of, that we do for resiliency, it is a requirement, is every 5 years, we update our natural hazard mitigation plan. And in 2023, the Planning Commission, hopefully by August, will have their natural resources section and the entire plan of development updated into one complete document. And there's also a focus on that about resilience, sustainability, and discussion on climate change and sea level rise.
So that could impact the town greatly, with shoreline properties and paying high taxes. You know, over a period of time. You know, if you're losing houses,
Right.
you're losing tax revenue.
Susan, you had a question, and then we go to Carl.
No, go ahead.
Carl?
I see Chris frequently in my office, which is great. I enjoy her company and everything she talks about. So she's asked me, she's come into the office and said, can I apply for these grants? And I've said yes, just so this committee knows. She wouldn't have applied for the grants if I said, no, not a good idea. I don't think the money will be there. I think, you know, it's a hard issue to wrap your hands around, wrap your brain around. Sometimes, I mean, even though we hear about it all the time, you know, you know, if we allocate $100,000, what's it going to get us? In this case, I think it's going to get us two things with regard to the two different grants. And Brad, you're right. I mean, nature's nature. I mean, Sandy changed a lot of things. But with regard to the Chalker Beach, Chapman Beach, and that whole tide gate issue, we don't even know when this tide gate was built. We think it was built during post-depression as a work, what was it, work WPA program?
Project.
Yeah, Work Projects Act, yeah. We think it was a WPA program. It doesn't serve the needs of Chalker Beach at the moment. And it may be part of the problem for water that is being retained inland. At least that's according to some of the residents there. One thing that you cannot do is apply for construction money unless you have a plan. We all know this. And getting that soft cost, like, you know, usually the town has to pay for its own engineering before we go for a grant. In this case, to be able to get the money to do the planning with a match, either from ARPA funds or some other source, and then be able to apply for what might be a real project in Chalker Beach, which is an important area of town, of course, and they've been coming in with studies for the last 10 years, at least as long as I can remember. I think it's important to get a lot of this work done if we can get both these grants. And I know Chris is working really hard on it. And I think it's important enough for our community to move forward with some of this. I mean, I know there here and there you hear stuff like, why aren't we doing anything? Well, we have done a lot, and you've heard a little bit of that from Chris, raising the freeboard to 2 feet. I can tell you that politically, I caught some crap for that, to use a colloquialism. I caught some grief because it's higher than we had to go. But in discussions with Chris and other members on the planning committee and other people in town, it was the right thing to do for new construction. And it's more expensive for people to put up a house, but they're not going to have, hopefully, a problem, and they're going to be able to rebuild if there is a problem. So we have taken actions. Now, to take major actions, are we going to build dikes in the Sound? Unlikely. But you know, we need to get an idea of where the sand is shifting, what we can do, and then we will pick off construction projects as we're able to. But I think everybody here knows when you start talking construction and sea level rise, you could be talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, and no community on its own is going to be able to handle this. And I think taking it from a regional point of view, from a planning perspective, and then potentially from a construction perspective, will definitely put us in a much better position. I'm going to be leaving, and you'll see my face in about 5 minutes. I got to come to town hall.
Susan, did you have a point?
Well, a lot of this I understand with Chris because one of my other hats, I'm with the Audubon Society and the migration of birds and a bunch of that. And this has definite impact just on the natural, ecology of the state. But you can't, but like Chris is saying, you can't look at one item and not have a direct impact on another item. And the best way to fight that is knowledge, is information. And to see the overall pattern from what you're saying, I think is money well spent. Because no one knows what overall we look at until we look at this. And just to use your one little example at Chocolate Beach for that little dam, water thing. But I mean, it's been there for many, many years, but now we're really facing every year that sea level rise is going. We know, I mean, we all know that the ices are melting and the water level is increasing, and that's creating hazard all over. But we also know from past experience, just Holes Marina, that has changed the water input for the causeway over underneath the causeway and what the silt is doing. That's just one small little thing. So in my opinion, every little bit of this is directly related to the other, and we need an overall picture. And how to do that is to put money down, because you can't even begin to understand or plan what to do in the future. And that's part of what ARPA is about, is how do we present our town in a better position for the future in case of hazards. So,
Right.
thank you.
I think we ought to make a motion to approve the 25,000 for 2000.
Well, I was just gonna ask, so from what is the time? You've got the $25,000, and what I would say more immediate, because you've got that grant in hand. When do you receive the, any notification around the 2023 grant? Is that?
So the 2023 grant, we should know, it's November, and we would have to come up with a match by January 2024.
Okay. All right, so we've got some time. And so right now, we're really looking at, 2022, you've got the grant in hand and you've got consultant almost on board, so you need the money to be able to move that. Just put all that together. Okay, hold that motion for just a second. Maureen, did you have a point?
No,
Okay.
I'm ready for the motion.
Okay,
Can I just ask one quick question? So quick, I promise. If the other towns don't put in money for 2022, what's the max that we would be looking at to get the grant? Is it just the 25 or is it?
So right now, Westbrook is committing a larger portion, because they're starting from scratch. And I think they're sponsoring Clinton. I'm not really sure how that works. We're sponsoring.
We're just into the.
Because they're rural, but I feel like that's part of our community, and they should have been included in the first round. I don't know why they were excluded. So 25,000 is the number for the 2022, and it could end up being less depending on how they're going to look at my in-kind services, things of that nature. But 25,000 is roughly where we are.
You think that was a tax reduction?
okay, so we've got a motion on the table. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So there,
Thank you.
yeah, so we'll need to go to Board of Selectmen town meeting, but I know that at the Board of Selectmen meeting earlier today, they were talking about, Carl's putting together already an agenda for the town meeting following the one that's going to be happening in just a few minutes. So we'll, so hopefully we can move pretty quickly on that. I guess Board of Finance. So, one other question, this is really just to evidence my lack of knowledge, and that is about a year ago, it seems to me, there was some newspaper articles about some actions that were going on in Fenwick around kind of a new way to create, not, I guess they weren't putting a seawall back in, but they're using vegetation and things like that. Are you knowledgeable enough to talk to that and whether or not there's those kinds of activities that could also be taking place at this point?
So the living shoreline project, that's how they call it, so pretty much it's rather than build a seawall, you have more of a naturally vegetative. In some ways, they almost look like berms, depending on how, there's a number of different natural structures that actually the Department of Energy Environmental Protection, they would prefer those and they encourage them because they're natural. They worked with a company called Fenwick, with a company called GZA. They funded it themselves. I know we talked about some potential areas in town for living shorelines when we did the 2017 study. But nothing ever really came to fruition. And I think a lot of it is we need more detailed information to actually get comments. So is something, living shorelines, another thing that is also going on, and I think you've talked to Great Hammock Beach. Great Hammock Beach, they actually applied through the town for a circuit grant because they're having issues where they have their boats and the pilings are shifting and there's a swirl of water and there's a lot of erosion and marsh degradation and destruction and starvation. And they've actually been looking at that area. I mean, if it was up to me, like I said, I would keep going with this circle because they also are looking and interested, in a study of their area just to see what's happening there. And it's unfortunate, that we can't go for, I think it's like 10.3 million, because I could spend that, I mean, I could find a lot of reasons in Old Saybrook why to go through, and I know there was some frustration that we can't, but our grant writers are Chris, you kind of gotta, you gotta stop somewhere.
Take steps.
And it's actually a pretty large amount to ask for, but we structured this grant so that it could be kind of dissected. So if we don't get the 352,000, maybe we'll get 100,000. So we're trying to go through and move it along, and then that way we can give the communities, and the town.
Just like your twin.
We can give, we can provide that information and help for other studies and projects. I had two other points. I don't know if you have any other questions, but to go quickly, I know you were talking about, property values. And when Carl was talking about the whole issue about the freeboard, I don't know, well, you may be aware, but a lot of people may not be aware. We have people paying $25,000 a year for their flood insurance.
Yeah.
And by elevating these homes, and Carl was talking about, there was a lot of pushback, you're forcing people to elevate the homes. And I said, well, let's look at it this way. Can you sell a house with a $400 policy faster than one with a $25,000 policy? So, you kind of have to look at it a little bit more in perspective, because it's not getting better. And in the properties right on the water, I mean, that's a lot of our tax base. So the more we can do to try to figure out and protect them, we were really fortunate in Sandy and Irene. I mean, there are areas that, these neighborhoods were just wiped out in other communities. We were really lucky. And I think by kind of looking at it, a global picture, at least maybe we can identify what to do for the future, as well as build more resilient homes. It might be a different step.
We're talking about cost, Carl, 2,000 or 2 feet up. It's not really a lot of money. You're talking about pilings being 2 feet taller?
Talk about what?
Pilings being 2 feet taller, et cetera?
Talking about the first. Well, describe what 2 feet of freeboard is.
2 feet of freeboard is that, so FEMA says the flood is coming
Yeah.
here, so you have to put your first board here. In 2008, we said you have to go up a foot. But then what happened that no one really thinks about is that the building code changed last year to go up a foot anyway. So we were ahead of the curve in 2008 for something that just went into the Connecticut building code, but we're already 2 feet above. So by having the houses higher, it may be more for pilings. One of the things where it's exceptionally more expensive is when you have a house that has a concrete foundation with the vents, because now you're having another 2 feet of concrete. But for the most part, you know, if you look at the amount of money that's spent, and you look at how much people are paying for flood insurance over a 30-year mortgage, you know, is it better off to pay 20,000 a year?
That's kind of the point. The point is next time they change the maps again up, you're still clear.
We're trying to kind of guess, that's what we're doing, but the other thing that is interesting is that FEMA hasn't taken sea level rise or climate change into consideration in their mapping.
Yeah.
So if they start doing that, Connecticut is slowly starting to recognize through deep that sea level rise is something that's happening. We could have huge impacts as far as 2 feet or 3 feet. We're guessing, but we're trying to guess a little bit ahead of the game so that we don't have housing stock that already is non-compliant once they come in with the first map.
So we're fortunate. Chris is expert in flood statewide. And I think you're consulting with FEMA on some new or on their
So
revisions.
So FEMA's asked me to participate in the, and I've been on a committee, it's been going a little slow. They have the guidebook for municipalities, FEMA publication for 70. So they've asked for community participation. So I'm on that board, which is a national kind of board through FEMA. And then I'm also a certified floodplain manager in every state in Connecticut and the nation. I know it doesn't seem like a lot, but we only have 100 and I think it's 120.
So
No, I see this is, so in Connecticut, I have that number too. There's only 38 nationally certified people in Connecticut. That's engineers, surveyors. So it's, I think that's how I got sucked into the FEMA.
So to have you on.
And I need to ask too many questions.
So when she comes in and says, this is what I think we should do in
Yeah.
terms of a grant and explains it to me, I listen. So,
Thank
we
you.
approved it while you were gone.
yeah, I heard.
Okay, so Chris, you said you had 2 things. That was one. Is there a second one that you had, or did you hit both of them?
Well, we talked about the second grant that we don't have. That's the
Right.
2023 grant. And I mean, I think I've done a pretty good job covering
Yeah.
all that we do. So we're keeping our fingers crossed for 2023.
So, and I know you sent me a copy of the 2022 grant, is that correct? So I have that electronically.
I believe I sent 2022 and 2023.
Yeah, no, but there's.
Don't print 2023 because I think I gave, it's about that big. The 2022, I gave you the summary.
So
But I
going,
can get that to you.
going to Brad's question, I've got the 2015, 2018, and I've got this, so I'll just send out an email to everybody that has all of those studies involved.
So it's right on the homepage on our website. So if you go through and you
Yeah.
click, right on the right in the homepage, it says town plans and initiatives. It's, you click on it and all our all our plans are there. For the future.
Are there any other questions of Chris? Casey, you have an arrow right above you, so I keep looking and I keep thinking you kept your hand up, but it's not there. So, Kristen, are you all set? I assume she is.
Take it off the mute.
Everybody here. Okay, thank you very much. Very much appreciate it.
Thank you for your time.
Anytime I can help and answer questions, please.
We will make that happen.
And there'll be consideration also for if we get the grant, we could be notified of the 23 grant
In
sooner.
November, she said.
Okay.
I'm hoping sooner.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so I think we kind of hit both 4 and 5 with that. Unless anybody else has any other comments around resiliency. In which case, we are at comments from our committee members. Comments?
Other than the fact that I'm glad we're looking at sea level rise, because that's a major problem that we're gonna be seeing.
Yeah.
Right. I have a comment, and that is one of the things that is exciting is that Carl and Jennifer and many other people are working hard, Judy, working hard on getting celebrate, what are we calling it? The party. Celebrate Saybrook, Celebrate Saybrook. So the, on the June 25th, and, you know, I'd like to think that we planted some of the seeds as we were talking about ARPA and the need to come out of the pandemic with a party, and now we've got a party being planned, and I think that's great.
Trying like heck.
Yeah, as best we can. I don't see either Casey or Kristen having a comment, in which case I will call for a motion to adjourn.
Oh, wait a minute. Oh,
No, this is for the 6 o'clock.
Okay.
The town meeting is coming up right
I'm
behind us.
sorry, did I read it on?
So moved.
Yeah,
Let's get out of
second,
here.
Maureen's got a second, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Town meeting.